Good afternoon and welcome to the initial Dibble Second Wednesday webinar for 2021. We're really happy that you all are here and look forward to sharing this time with you. I'm Kay Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute, and I want to introduce my two colleagues who are here with me today, Esther Barton and Rebecca Powell. Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Esther.
Hi.
Hello.
They're going to help me answer questions and deal with any technical difficulties, of which we hope there are none. Today we're going to be talking about marriage and kind of a current look at the literature around marriage. Just for the record, I want to say that the biggest change in marriage since, for many of us, is that now there's marriage equality. And so this is no longer a heteronormative experience. Everybody can come to the party. In states, states have different rules, but adults who are eligible to marry in their state are eligible to marry other adults in their state. So we're happy for that, because before we used to have to say marriage or committed union. Now everybody can be married. So before we get into this, I'm just curious, how many of this is your first webinar? Would you please raise your hand on your control panel? And Esther, can you tell me about what percentage or what number are new to Dibble webinars?
Yeah, it looks like we're looking at about 10 or 20%.
Great, great. Well, we welcome you here. We hold these every second Wednesday, and we have a wonderful itinerary for the coming year. So to get on with this, the Dibble Institute was founded, our founding spark with Charlie Dibble came during a wedding. When Charlie Dibble was talking to his grandniece, and there's, this isn't her, but representing her, was in a fluffy white dress. And we don't know what he said to her, but in response, she said, don't worry, Uncle Charlie, it's just my first wedding. And Charlie was, of course, taken aback. Here was this woman on this important day of her life who was saying, it may not work out and I'm okay with that. I'll just keep going. So Charlie and his wife, Helen, but primarily Charlie, who was an engineer and kind of a fix-it guy, decided this is a problem he wanted to look into at greater depth to see if there's something he could do. So he talked to the leading researchers of the day, and they knew a lot about relationships. Now, some of you may not remember this time, but there was days before video cameras where you had to get full rooms of equipment. But in the 80s and 90s, researchers were able to bring small units into rooms and tape couples having difficult discussions. They were able to put heart monitors on them and other physiological measures and watch them interact and talk about difficult topics. And so they were able to start to develop theories around what made relationships strong and stable, or what helped them founder. And Charlie was concerned about this not only because of his niece, but also because many of his young friends, he could see their trajectories change if their parents' marriages foundered. So Charlie came up with the idea for the Dibble Institute, which was to translate research into teaching tools that we would make available to other people. We're not a direct provider of services that help young people gain agency in their intimate relationships. It's a big mission in a very small way. We're a national independent nonprofit. We publish evidence-based programs that are used in all 50 states, across many of our territories and foreign countries. Thanks to people like you, because again, Dibble doesn't do the direct work, we reach tens of thousands of young people every year, resulting in, by this point, over 2 million young people, and probably more since we first started this work. So for those of you who are new to us, let me just go over our core values. We believe in science. We're big fans of science. And as science changes, we change what's in our materials. So I don't know how many of you were spraying your mail last March because we thought maybe COVID was on mail or on groceries, and now we know we no longer have to do that. The same thing happens in relationship research. Sometimes we understand one thing and then it changes over time. And we like to keep our materials up to date. We also believe in stable, safe, and healthy families. We're huge fans of that. So this means that if a relationship is violent or marriage is violent, it must be changed or terminated. Children are not well served to be in high conflict homes, violent homes. They should go away. Secondly, there are thousands of dedicated single parents who every day do the hard work of raising kids. They're heroes. They're to be congratulated. So this means no disrespect to single parent families, but it's hard. It's super hard. Ask them if it might have been easier to have a partner, to have some help. So again, no disrespect to single parents. And finally, like I said earlier, now that there's marriage equality, everybody can join in on the marriage fund. And lastly, we believe that all people deserve respect. So we know that most young people, as a normal part of their developmental process, will come into a time where they have romantic attractions. And so we want to serve people, whether it's based on their gender identification or sexual orientation, their ethnic or racial background, or their abilities, meaning people on the autism spectrum, blind people, deaf people. We want to be able to serve all of those people because we know that all relationships can be made better with relationship skills, and everyone deserves to have the best relationship that they can. So I said earlier, I'm Kay Reed. This is my pre-COVID look on the ED, and I'm very interested in this field of relationship education. But here's what I'm not. I'm not a researcher. I'm not an academic. I'm reporting today on my own dive into the recent literature to answer the question, does marriage still matter? People ask it to me all the time. I ask myself all the time. And so on your control panel is a PDF of all the resources I consulted when I did this project. I was originally asked to do this for the Administration for Children and Families, and I'm happy to share it more broadly here. So you're here because you have a soft spot for kids, right? We all do. We want to help them achieve their own goals and dreams. But it's easy to talk about the importance of graduating from high school, the importance of getting job skills, the importance of preventing or planning your pregnancy, preventing pregnancy, but it can be tricky to talk about romantic relationships and questions around marriage. And I know from looking at your questions that you registered with, many of you are searching for how can I talk to youth about romantic relationships and marriage. So that's one of my goals today, is that you'll have some tools to do that. We want to be fact-based, but we don't want to be preachy. We want to be able to give young people, again, agency is getting information and able to take action on that information. I want to know, and maybe you want to know what to say when I hear something like, I'm in love, or how do I know this is the one? Or yikes, it's not the right one. How do I break up? So these are all skills and information that young people really, really need and deserve. So today I'm taking you on my own journey to see the data, the research, and the outcomes associated with marriage and family. So here's the topics we're going to cover: the current state of marriage, the history of the marriage movement, current research questions, to whom does marriage matter, and how can I help young people gain agency in their intimate relationships. So the first one, state of marriage. So most, not all, but most Americans see a benefit in marriage, a societal benefit. So if you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, 53% of people say couples are better off if they want to stay together long-term to eventually get married. Yet, on the other side, that little pie chart, the same group says 69% of them say it's okay to live together even if you don't plan to get married. So there's this little bit of disconnect. There's no value judgment here. This is just data. Just interesting. This happened in 2019 by the Pew Research Center. So there's people, you know, there's sometimes we can hold opposite beliefs in our own brains. But this is interesting. This also comes from Pew data from 2010, 2014. In 2010, 61% of adults who had never married hoped to marry, and it went down by 8 percentage points in 2014 to 53. And then the number who weren't sure, 27 to 32%. But what's interesting to me here is not sure isn't no. Not sure is maybe not now, not the right person, I'm not ready. You know, there's many things in there. So I look at the bigger picture and think it went down by 3%. 61 and 27 is 88. 53 and 32 is 85. So it went down by 3 percentage points. So most people, the grand majority of never married adults, say they would like to get married. Yet, and this is an interesting chart about marriage, which is in the blue, and divorce, which is in the goldenrod, marriage and divorce rates since 1860. Long time. And what's a couple interesting things here. The marriage line is correlated to some major historical events. World War I ends, marriage went down. Also happened to be the end of the Spanish flu pandemic. Great Depression, marriage really fell off. Think of all that economic dislocation, people migrating around, real suffering economically. Then in the gold line at the bottom, there's a little tick up in the looks like mid 40s in divorce during World War II. And one could imagine that if your honey was shipping out tomorrow and going to the, you know, wherever they were going, Europe or Japan or the Philippines or wherever, that, you know, 48 hours, let's get married, that's a good idea. And maybe some of those people thought it wasn't a good idea. And then World War II ends, all those romantic songs of the 40s, everybody came home, and look at that big spike in marriage. But the interesting part, and we're going to talk about more, is if you see the red arrow and that big surge in divorce in the 70s and 80s, it started here in California. I'm in Berkeley, California, with Governor, then became President Reagan, who instituted no-fault divorce. So prior to this, in order to get a divorce, you had to prove, you know, abandonment, abuse, you know, incompatibility. You had to, like, there was a threshold in order to get divorced. But no-fault divorce meant you could just say, I'm not into you anymore, let's get divorced. And the therapeutic, the clinical community, the therapists confirmed that. They were thinking at the time, if parents are not happy, different than what's the word? Violent. If they're just not happy, children will be happier if they divorce. So pent-up demand, it looks like, a lot of people divorced. And then since the 80s, you can see how both marriage and divorce have been falling off, which is not the same as people partnering, right? People are still partnering. They're just not going through the legal process of marriage and then a subsequent divorce. So, but that's an interesting look at how divorces and marriages worked over the time. And we'll see after COVID, you know, we have a big spike in marriages, a big spike in divorces, you know, we'll see. So over time, and this will come as no surprise to any of us, the number of children, the percentage of children raised by two married parents has declined. Let's take the top, the orange line that represents white children, and the gray line at the bottom that represents Black children. And so the rate for white children went from 90% to 80% being raised by 70%, sorry, raised by their own two married parents for white children. Black children went from the high 60% to the high 30%. So white children fell by 20%, Black children fell by 30%. So not news to anybody that this is the trend. Fewer people are marrying, more children are being raised without two married parents. Makes sense. So again, this is about trends. 20% of children are living with a single mom. And if you look at, so this goes from 68 to 2017, roughly a 50-year time span. We have 85% of children In 68, being raised by two parents, 65%, two married parents, 65 in 2017. Solo mothers have almost doubled from 12 to 21%. Cohabiting parents went from, they weren't even tracking it in the 60s to 7% today. So again, no value judgments, just data. So this is, kind of interesting to me, or very interesting actually. Lots of people have said to me, listen, if you're talking to young people about marriage, you're talking about an antiquated form of coupling that they don't care about, it's irrelevant to them, they haven't experienced it, they don't want it. Well, this graph tells a different story. This is from Monitoring the Future, a very well-respected, very long-lasting survey of high school seniors over the last, 40 years, call it 40 plus years. And there's many questions on this survey, and they do it annually. And some of them are related to marriage and family life. So what's astonishing to me is how little this graph has changed, that 80% of gals and close to 70% of guys, when asked, having a good marriage and family life, said it was, quote, extremely important, right? So if you have those, probably there was a 5-point scale, extremely important, important, okay, not important, really not important. So they were answering at the highest level of that, right? And see how consistent this is over time. Keep this in mind, 80% and 70%. Because the next graph is, the question was asked, how likely is it that you'll stay married to the same person for your life? So girls who are at 80% of wanting to be married are at 70% confidence. Guys who are at 70% are below 60%. And then over time, those have decreased, 5 to 10% over time. So it's this gap, it's this lag, it's this gap between what young people want and what they expect that is both confidence inspiring and also kind of sad, right? That they don't feel like they can make this happen. Okay, end of graphs for a while. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the marriage movement, and that's really about how marriage got involved in national policy and what was behind that. So the marriage movement began in the 1990s. So back to Charlie and all the researchers he was talking with in the late 80s and 90s, marriage researchers were starting to watch that retreat from marriage, that uptick in divorce, the decline of marriage, and they were getting more data on what made relationships tick, what made them for long lasting, what could make them strong. And researchers like Judith Wallerstein of UC Berkeley wrote a book called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, which, if you haven't read it and you're interested in the field, is fascinating, because oftentimes we think, well, marriage or family formation, its impacts on children only matter or only really happen to people in the lower income brackets, but it's not true. That book is astonishing about how marriage dissolution impacts upper income people too. So it began in the 90s, and in the early days, marriage itself was the key variable. So there was this kind of thinking, and I'll cop to being part of this at the time, that this one variable could make all the difference, right? If people would just get married, then lots of good things would happen. And what we've learned over time is that for sure, family formation is an important issue. It should be taken seriously, but it's for sure not the only issue. So from a document from 1996 called Why Marriage Matters, it's a big document, there are like 46 findings, and they said, if you are married or you're living in a neighborhood or town or community that has more marriages, people will enjoy better health, lower crime, lower domestic violence, lower teen pregnancy, higher home ownership, higher property values. If you are not married, or you're in a community that marriage is not common, there'll be higher teen drug rates, kids are going to be more likely to repeat a grade, more violent crime, more likely to drop out of school, higher suicide and depression. So let me say for the first time today, and I will say it multiple times today, correlation is not causation, right? So that means that while marriage can be correlated with these things, we do know that married people tend to be more healthy. We do know that in neighborhoods where there is more marriage is more prevalent, there's less violent crime. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what made it happen. You know, it's correlated, but it necessarily wasn't caused by that. You have to look at quality of neighborhoods, quality of schools, quality of healthcare, systemic racism. So hopefully now we're learning a sense of humility around the challenges associated with intimate relationships. That these, on the one hand, they're related, but they're not necessarily the only or sole cause. So in the 90s, so we have the marriage movement starting, and now Bill Clinton is president, a Democrat, and they're rewriting welfare. This is helping people, which is a program to help people out of poverty. It was called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. And now so the people who are writing this new law saw the work around marriage, and they thought, wow, maybe if we work on family formation, we could have an impact on poverty. So marriage and fatherhood goals were added to TANF in 1996. And there are 4 goals that address unwed parenting, marriage promotion is how they talked about it, and father absence. Three things that they thought would impact poverty. And it makes sense for them to be doing this if you think about marriage as kind of a new variable to consider. So, so that legislation was passed in 96. And then in 2006, the Office of Family Assistance from Health and Human Services has been administering healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood grants. So this is the second time for you to raise your hands, and Esther, if you could please report back if any of you have ever had or currently have a healthy marriage / relationships or responsible fatherhood grant. Please raise your hand if you've been part of that funding.
All right, it looks like our number is capped out at about 10%.
Okay, great, great. Well, those of you who are interested in this field, there was just a 5-year grant was just competed and awarded in late September. And so in another 5 years, there'll hopefully be more funding. So stay tuned because it's great funding to use. So just to finish out this slide, you know, so it was written under Clinton. The grant started under Bush, and sadly, a lot of people have then identified these grants as part of a conservative approach, where in reality, in the 90s, when it was conceived, it was a bipartisan effort to address poverty. So that's the history of the marriage movement. So what are the current research questions on marriage? As I was reading the literature, there are some really interesting questions because people do see a benefit of marriage, but they aren't sure why, right? So is it simply a math problem? Is it because 2 spouses bring higher incomes and lower expenses to the family unit? Could be that. And people are actively researching all these things. Or are 2 committed spouses that are able to provide consistent parenting over the lifespan of the child, right? And marriage means that you publicly commit. You're not just moving in your slippers and your toothbrush and your jammies and pretty soon we're together. You're saying this in front of your friends and family that we commit to each other. So is there some secret sauce in either the commitment or two spouses that are working on consistent parenting? Or is marriage a visible expression of something else? Are people who are choosing to get married, for instance, better able to delay gratification? Would they have left the marshmallow on the table? Do they feel more empathy? Can they communicate better? Can they problem solve better? You know, is there something that people that are self-selecting about marriage based on some internal factor? Other research questions are, by getting married, do people become more stable? Or when people are stable, do they become married? And there's, you know, who knows? I mean, again, people are looking at these. I bring these up because it's interesting to think about how people are thinking about this. And does the decline, or this is more of a macro scale, does the decline in marriage exacerbate poverty? So if you know, do we have more poverty because there's less marriage? Or is it because of a bad economy, we see a decline in marriages? We saw that dip during the Depression. So which is it? It's kind of a chicken and the egg, or it could both be true, just depending on the circumstances. In the list I provided for you is a great webinar from Freakonomics. It's not a webinar, it's a podcast from Freakonomics called Marriage in the Fracking Boom. And, you know, we can't do experiments with people on marriage, like you people over there, you get married, you raise kids, you people over here don't get married, you raise kids, and let's see what happens. You can't do that. You have to look for natural experiments often. And so a researcher out of Maryland looked at men in the Dakotas during the fracking boom who are making plenty of money and thinking, oh, I'll bet my thesis is that by having a higher than average income, they will marry at higher rates. And the answer is they didn't. And I'm sure there's other factors, but anyway, look at the PDF. And you know, we're going to be able to learn from COVID where marriage went during this time. But here's Kay Reed's question, Kay Reed's research question. If marriage isn't important, if parental divorce and separation, or if having two biological parents together is not important, then why is divorce and separation considered an adverse childhood experience? So most of us know about ACEs, how they change a young person's trajectory, particularly if there's more than one. You know, we all probably have one or two ACEs for sure. But why did Dr. Folletti put this on the list if marriage weren't important? So think about that. So those are the research questions. So the next section is, for whom does marriage matter? Does it matter, and for whom? So let me just say, so this is, let me introduce you to our thoughtful researcher. 3 points here. One, he's looking at populations, not individuals. We're all going to be able to find exceptions to what I'm going to say, that there's always someone who beat the odds, who did it differently. So we're looking at really population-wide changes and benefits or detriments. This is on average for the average person. Number two, not everybody should be or wants to be married. We're not at all about proposing a little marriage conveyor belt to move people into the little marriage factory. Not us. But for people who want to be married and are in a low conflict, nonviolent relationship, and they want to do this, then you know, let's talk about those people. And finally, second time I'm going to say this: correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. So there are many factors involved in people's lives, and intimate relationships is but one of them. So based on current data, and I've put the main article I cited here at the bottom, I found this from, but it's also more in the bibliography, it's very clear that married relationships are more stable than cohabiting relationships. Married couples plan their children, they don't slide into children, they tend to have more education, and they earn higher income. So let's unpack that a little bit. It's more stable than cohabiting. And it could just simply be, as we said earlier, do people who come to marriage, are they more stable people? Maybe that's it. Planning children is a big deal, because if you just slide into children, like, oops, you know, gotta, you know, have a kid, you maybe haven't had the talk, right? How committed are we? Do we see a future together? It's been very clear over the last 10, 15 years that the retreat from marriage has been in people who do not have a college education. Used to be people who didn't have a high school education, didn't get married with the frequency of people who had a high school education, but now that's moved up. So people without a college education are continuing to move away from marriage, whereas people who have an education, who have a higher education, they're getting married in huge numbers. And finally, earning higher incomes, it could simply be that if your home life is stable, you're better able to take that night class that gets you a promotion, or you can work later because somebody's home with the kids, or I mean there's all kinds of reasons that that home stability might lead to higher incomes. Marriage matters also, according to Brad Wilcox, who writes he releases a report every couple of years called State of Our Unions. Again, it's in the bibliography. That married couples seem to be able to better weather the challenges of parenthood. There's a challenge of parenting a 2-year-old, and a challenge of parenting a teenager, and there's all these challenges. And having someone there for emotional support, for backup, they're better able to weather those challenges. But it's modest. So this isn't to say, as I said earlier, that single parents aren't doing amazing work. Married couples have more assets and wealth. It could be that idea from me to we. We have goals. We have things we're looking forward to. And lastly, I remind my husband of this all the time. Married couples report greater happiness. And the way Brad explained it to me was that when your head is in the game, that's when people are happier. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a kid who loves soccer. So you show up to the practice early. Maybe you help the coach get the balls and the goals out. You make sure you remember your shoes and your shin guards. You play hard. You get dirty. You cheer. You're there at all the practices. On game day, you show up with your cleaned jersey. You have everything ready. You celebrate with your teammates when you do well. When you don't do well, you pat each other on the back and say, well, next time we'll do better. Their head is in the game. Versus a child who says, well, soccer, it's okay, and maybe forgets to show up for half of the practices. Maybe doesn't come on time. Maybe forgets his shoes. Maybe only likes it when they win and doesn't just pick himself up when things are tough. So greater happiness, but especially if you're into it. So those are the benefits of marriage for adults. So youth. We're going to talk about how the order that one does things matters. And there's this success sequence for people who've never had children. There's another success sequence for people who have had children, for youth who've had children, and that's basically to take good care of your child and go back and do the success sequence. So let me talk a little bit about this, because on the one hand, you could think it's just about hopscotch, right? Just do one, then the other, then the other. And what helped me understand this better is this book called Social Poverty by Dr. Sarah Halperin Meakin. She's up in Wisconsin now. And she talks about role theory. So role theory is this. We all have roles that we learn how to fit into over time. And it's especially critical as young people leave adolescence and go into adulthood. There's a lot of roles they're navigating, right? There's the adolescent role, which is I'm finding myself, I'm finding my friends, I'm individuating from my family, I'm finding my own interests, I'm becoming my own person. Then and that's kind of linked with the career, I'm learning how to be a good employee, being places on time, being thoughtful, being responsive, all that. Then there's being a partner. And we start learning how to be a partner by dating and getting to know people and this and that. And then when we're serious, there's more discussions and there's more we time. And so there's that whole partnering. Who are we together? Not just who I am by myself. And then when we're parents, that's a whole new role, right? I have this little, I like to call them grubs, this little grub there that needs me, and I love this, this child incredibly, and that's a whole different role. So roles normally change, and that we transition from those goals over time, and it's especially prevalent, as I can say, or you can see it especially well with adolescents turning into adults. So, and they aren't necessarily strict. So, student or adolescent, and then career, and then dating partner, they kind of fold into each other. But Dr. Halperin Meakin talks about role malintegration, which is juggling too many roles at the same time. So how could that happen? Well, imagine you're in high school, and you have a baby, and you have this partner. So you've met this guy or gal, and now you're a mother or father. And so while at the one hand, developmentally, you're supposed to be finding yourself and being independent and moving away from your family, and in the romantic world, you're supposed to be, finding out, how can I be me in a we, and how can we do this together? I'm also a parent. And being a parent and being an adolescent, there's some crossover, but they're pretty different roles. So juggling all those roles, especially when there's that there's contradictions in those roles, is really tough. And then there's role overload, which is navigating parent and partner, just navigating too many, and especially parent and partner. And so to me, I see the success sequence as navigating all these role transitions successfully. So let me stop and talk a little bit about why we say marriage and we don't say committed relationships. Because while sure, there are people who have long-term committed relationships and they're doing just fine. Goldie Hawn is a great example. I can't remember her husband's name, but Goldie Hawn and her partner have been partners for 30, 40 years. They raised 3 or 4 kids. They put on their onesies at Christmas time, and they're adorable, but they're not typical. They're not typical. And what young people don't understand is the data that show that, and this came from the Fragile Families study out of Columbia University, that at the birth of a child, an unmarried couple, low income, birth of a child, 80% of them were still romantically involved. And 80% of those people saw a future together. They wanted a future together. They had this new little life, and they wanted to protect that little life. But at 5 years old, 50% had split up. And by the time they were, I think it was 12, 2/3 of them had split up. So they split up at a much higher rate than married families. So yes, we could say marriage or a long-lasting committed relationship, but I don't think it does teenagers a great service unless we really explain the risks of going through these roles and not having it be marriage. Because again, I said earlier, marriage is a commitment ceremony. Really, that's really what it's about. I mean, there's obviously legal ramifications and legal benefits, but it's a out there committed ceremony. So I suppose if people who wanted to cohabit and they had a commitment ceremony, that'd be, probably that's protected. But that's why we talk about it as marriage and not just committed relationships or cohabiting. So again, to the success sequence for young parents, if you've had a baby, no worries. We love you. Just go back, finish your education, find a relationship, and then before you have a second baby, because it's so complicated. When you have multiple fathers, multiple relationships, it's just complicated for everybody. And if your marriage isn't in your future, good for you, no worries. Get as much education and training as you can, and don't have a baby. Having babies is something everyone can, I don't say everyone, but if you get pregnant and it wasn't your choice, I'm thinking this out, it's probably prosecutable, right? At some point, having a baby is is something that most people can choose. Most people can choose or not to have a baby. However, you choose not to have a baby, whether delaying sexual activity or using contraception, but it's something that young people can do. So we encourage them to do that, to wait on having babies until they're employed, educated, employed, and in a good, solid, hopefully married relationship. And here's the results of that. When they went back, and this is again Brad Wilcox at the National Marriage Project, they looked at a cohort of 28 to 34-year-olds, our buddies, the millennials, and they said, how many of you had done all three of those things in the order, integrated those roles in the order that they are meant to be integrated in? 86% were within the middle or high income bracket. If they hadn't done that, only 7% were in the high income bracket. 71% were lower income. So, and then people say, yes, but you're probably just talking about the rich kids. And actually, when they looked at it and they divided the cohort into low, middle, or high incomes, 80% of young people who'd grown up in low income circumstances, who had followed all three or were on track, hadn't had a baby yet, were 80% likely to be in middle or high income brackets. So it's quite powerful. And we talk to kids about graduating from high school all the time. We talk to kids about preventing pregnancy all the time. And there's no reason we can't talk to them about how to form long-lasting, safe, stable families. It's hard, for sure. I get it's hard. It's hard. And young people need solid supports and guidance to make it happen. But so hopefully through this webinar, maybe some of you will join us in thinking, we should address family formation as another way to talk about preparing young people for the future that they want. Finally, scholars tell us, and this came from the Futures of Children report just this last spring out of the Fragile Families work, that based on family resources, meaning so you could have low income married parents, high income married parents, it's all relative, right? But even within your family resources, married parents have more time, energy, maturity, which is good for kids. Money, money isn't everything, but money helps a lot. More stability. Having two parents brings two sets of networks, aunties and uncles on one side, aunties and uncles to the other side, and role models. So there's a lot of good reasons for children. So just to drill down just a little bit, they're also being able to do research now, and this is one that, again, from Brad Wilcox, married mothers who are in their early to mid-20s, or mothers who have earned a high school diploma, their children will more frequently graduate from high school and have a greater chance of avoiding poverty. So to me, this is about mothers matter, not that fathers don't matter, but they're showing that how mothers act is very predictive of their children. But finally, and this is, I think, really, this has been reported for years. You could see it in the CDC. You could see it. I mean, it's not all over. And this is seeing children's outcomes through a trauma lens. So children who are raised in unstable families are more physically and sexually abused, more problematic behaviors, poor social development, lower educational attainment, poor cognitive development, suffer wealth dependency as adults. So think about what you know about ACEs, right? And think about the fact that at Head Starts, our knickers get in a twist when there's too much staff turnover, because we think, oh, those little brains, their beloved teacher isn't there. Well, what happens to kids whose parents' partners are cycling in and out of the house? There's different styles of discipline. There's different styles of interacting. There might be other children involved. It's very complicated for them. And these turbulent relationships, according to Andrew Cherlin, who's a professor on the East Coast, are really hard on kids. So this is why I think Dr. Folletti put parental divorce and separation on the ACEs scale, because families where there's parental divorce and separation, and so that means, like, even if the parents aren't married but they're separated, the parents are separated, is tough on kids. And here's a promise, my last slide. or not last slide, last chart. So we're looking at something from 2010 from the CDC, and it characterizes physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse by family form. So the far left little goldenrod square represents married biological parents. And I'm going to go do the best, the next best, and the worst kind of family form. So you can see that for married parents, married biological parents, 1.9 children, so almost 2 children per 1,000 suffers physical abuse, 0.5 sexual abuse, 0.8 emotional abuse. So get that. Okay. The next most protective, go over to the right to the darker blue. It says 5.9. It's second from the right. That is single parent with no partner. Those are those heroic single parents. 5.9 per 1,000 for physical, 2.4 for sexual, 2.9 for emotional. Now look at the very tall bar there, 19.5. That represents single parent with, let's see, yeah, single parent with a partner, right? So that's a mom or a dad with a non-related, non-married partner. And if I do my math correctly, the difference between 1.9 for married parents and 19.5 for single parents with a partner is 10 times. Same for sexual abuse, 0.5 to 9.9, that's actually 20 times. And emotional abuse is about 10 times. More prevalent in homes where there's a parent and a partner. So this is a horrifying slide to me. You know, we don't talk about, and this isn't, you know, we're not judging people. This isn't a moral issue, you know, but really, family formation, how you set up your family matters to kids. And I don't, you know, we can do a whole nother webinar on why this might happen, but just this data, I think, gives us pause for us who care about kids, who want the best for them. We want to avoid, you know, avoid trauma. And that's not to say we can't educate people, we can't help them be more selective or more thoughtful in picking partners, but I just think we ought to be aware that it happens. And I think that's awareness is the first step here. So consider yourself made aware. So we start to see a more nuanced picture of marriage. Marriage relationships tend to be more stable, and children crave stability. Married people have more time, money, networks, and all those things give children advantages. Imagine if your HR, you know, think of you at your work today, if you had double the number of people at your work, wouldn't that make life easier? Right. Same with having a partner, right? In general, being raised by 2 parents in healthy, safe, and stable relationships lead to better outcomes for children. But what's interesting is there are researchers, and I understand this, that being raised by 2 parents in an unmarried relationship versus 2 biological parents in married relationships is not that much difference. It's not significantly different. The difference is it's rare to find 2 parents in a cohabiting relationship that lasts longer over time. Again, on average, you know, I'm sure there's lots of exceptions that we know about. But we also have to be aware that poverty, racism, inequality, the parents' educational level, the parents' trauma, generational trauma, all that, as well as neighborhood and school quality, also impact outcomes for children. It's just not family form, for sure. And so my takeaway from this, from my study, is that building safe and stable and healthy families is critical for children's outcomes. And marriage doesn't guarantee that, for sure, but it often makes it easier. And we need to say that, acknowledging all the other variables and challenges that people have in their lives. So how can I help young people gain agency in their intimate relationships? Well, the Dibble Institute has an answer. The first one is don't go to a psychic. No. So we can help young people correct faulty relationship beliefs. We can help them understand the physiology of attraction, how to assess relationships, how not to drift into parenting, ways to self-regulate, to communicate, to solve problems, all super helpful skills. And in the intro to the webinar, we talked about surprising places you can use relationship skills. And here's some, the data show that when you help young people get smart about their love lives, it decreases unplanned pregnancy, decreases dating violence, prevents sexual abuse, prevents trafficking, builds social emotional confidence, avoids those ACEs, and builds employability skills. So all good. And here are some points about the data. Our studies on Dibble products have shown a 46% reduction in the risk of teen pregnancy over doing nothing. Significantly, this has been studied at Auburn for years, significantly reducing verbal aggression and violence in teens, helps young people exit healthy and dangerous relationships. We always hear those stories, and reduces faulty relationship beliefs. An important thing of what we do. So while the Dibble Institute is a publisher, and we're happy to have you purchase our materials, and I know many of you who are on this call use our materials, and thank you so much. We also have lots of free resources. So if you go to our website under free resources, you'll find sample lessons, toolkits, case studies, reports, and places. If you go to under our programs, you can request review copies of our materials so you can check it out for yourself. We also have this very cool online facilitators toolkit, which was developed with the help of our clients at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, and we've been adding to it ever since. Lots of good information there. So let me close just by mentioning what young people tell us. The first quote is about building that confidence to be married from that very first slide. Second one, it's not just somebody I'm feeling. It needs to be somebody I want to be my kids to be raised by. It's about understanding the physiology of attraction and having guides to be able to understand what you're looking for. First time I've been able to sit down and talk about LGBTQ issues. Huge. Everybody needs help with their love life. Doesn't matter who you bring to the party. And the last part, I love this one. Mister, you know, all this information makes me not want to be in a relationship. Relationships are a lot more complicated than they seem. And this is about that role thing, role theory, that, you know, this person isn't ready for the role of partner. They're complicated. Maybe someday, but not now. They don't have to be. They can be in a different role. So anyway, so we just took a look at the data, history, research, questions all around family, life, and marriage, because we want to be able to talk to these young people about important life decisions. And talking about intimate relationships can be challenging, can be tricky. It's hard to know what to say. But I encourage you to do so we can help young people achieve their own goals and dreams. Thank you. So Esther, what's the question box say?
All right, Kay, so we have a few questions about the data.
Okay.
A few people wanted to know if there's any more recent data that you know of from the history section of your charts. It looked like some of the most recent data was from 2017 and some of the oldest data from 1996.
Right. So when I did this research over the summer, I got the most current data I could find. And so the short answer is not that I'm aware of. I know that one slide on family formation will be updated this year. That's an every 10-year slide or 10-year study. And others, I would encourage everyone to subscribe to the Pew Research Center. And I think you can pick family life, dating, and whatever, because whenever they get new things, they put it up. So Pew's your place to be.
Great, thank you. There's also a question asking if you can tell us a little more about the Fragile Family Study and whether you know if the data was self-reported or not.
Oh, that's interesting. So the Fragile Family Study, here, let me, here it is, I printed it out. So go to futureofchildren.org which is a part of Columbia University. And they've been doing this work, oh, I want to say 10 or 15 years now, where they've been, I don't want to say anything that isn't true, but I do know originally they were talking to parents at the birth of a child and their aspirations, their marital status, their aspirations, and then they were following them over time. So I'm not quite sure what self-reported means, except that if you're doing a research study, you're talking to people and they're telling you what they're doing. So I guess you'd have to have gained their confidence so that if they say I'm not living with my boyfriend or girlfriend, that would be true. But they continue to do studies. It's another good place to futuresofchildren.org to sign up for I think they put out 2 big journals a year with all kinds of interesting information. And they're the ones who really started the ball rolling around outcomes for children of families, low-income families. They've migrated a bit away from talking about family formation, and they look at they're looking at broader topics now. So I'd head over there as well. They're great people.
Thank you, Kay. One last question. We had someone ask, is there any data on the effects of children who are living with 2 non-biological parents? So for example, foster care families, same-sex families, or adopted families, anything like that you know of?
So a couple things. In terms of, I'm going to go back a little bit to, wrong. Let me see if I can pull this up again. Here we go. Why isn't it working? Okay. So in this slide, there's other married parents and unmarried parents. Oops. Show screen. Oh, sorry, people. This is why I joke with my staff. I should never be allowed to there we go. Oh well. Okay, I apologize. Try this. Oop. Oh well, I apologize. We will post this slide set. They have, of the 6 families formed, there's married biological parents, other married parents, unmarried parents, single parent, etc. So other married parents, I think, would be step parents, foster parents, or adoptive parents. So there is some data. It doesn't look all that protective to me based on this chart, which I would love to show you, but it seems not to be showing to me. Oh, there we go. So this purple line are other married parents, which would be step parents, adoptive parents, etc. Not as protective as your own biological parents. In terms of same-sex parents, there just isn't a lot of data yet. So I don't think, I'll bet, or I don't know, one could imagine, let's say it that way, that in the 5th National Incidence Study of Child Abuse and Neglect, they would have some data on same-sex parents. But I could imagine if what we're talking about that makes things protective is stability and safety and healthiness, that it doesn't matter what flavor your parents are. Yeah. Okay. What else?
That is all of our questions for today. I just wanted to say that one of our authors actually mentioned a bit of additional information about the Fragile Family Study. She said that there were extensive interviews given at the time of birth, at 3 years, 5 years, and beyond, and they gathered a lot of the health data about children in those families, and that the data indicates the same about same-sex families. If they're in a committed and stable relationship, then it has positive effects for children. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to keep running through this now. So thank you for joining us. This will be online by Monday. Please just head over there, give it to your friends, pass it around, the webinar and the attachments. We're on all the normal social media way, we do social media, but if you go to institute.org, dibbleinstitute.org, sign up for our newsletter, because that's where we put in the most recent research. We talk about these issues. We'd love to have you join our newsletter. Next month, we're super excited to have Jeff Landers and Tiffany Storm from Women in Need in Texas, who are going to talk about preventing dating violence and how they do that by building healthy relationships and social emotional learning. So we look forward to seeing you on February 10th. Appreciate you all being here, and wish you well in the coming weeks. Thanks so much.